to introduce you to my dear friend, Sarah Markham. So Sarah is a specialist behaviour support practitioner with 15 years experience in the forensic and disability sectors. Sarah has experience working with diverse populations and presentations, including perpetrators of domestic violence, high-risk offenders with disabilities, and has a special interest in sexualised behaviour, sexual deviance, and sexual offending. So Sarah will be walking us through a presentation today that focuses on sexualised behaviours of concern. She has kindly allowed us to record today's session, and at the end we have some resources to share with you as well as the slides from today's presentation. Again, if you can just keep your microphones on mute, pop your questions in the chat as we go, but otherwise I'm going to pass you on to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And hello, everybody. To kick things off, we're going to do our acknowledgement of country. So, Ellie, you're right to do my screens things. Right. In the spirit of reconciliation, Australian health professionals, who I work for, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Thank you, Ellie. Right, objectives. Welcome, sorry, did I say welcome? Yeah, welcome to Sexualised Behaviours. So our objectives today is to understand what is a sexualised behaviour, understand the difference between a sexualised behaviour and sexual deviancy, what is appropriate sexual behaviour. We're going to go through dignity of risk for a person with a disability, how to build skill development, some positive behaviour strategies to assist when working with these behaviours, limitations and scope of our roles in positive behaviour support, some case studies, and obviously bringing it all together. And as Ellie said, question time at the end. Cool. So let's get into it. What is a sexualised behaviour of concern? So sexual behaviours occur along a continuum. So we start with curious and exploratory, and we go through, like, obviously building up to coercive and potentially harmful. There's no one shared definition of understanding of what constitutes sexualised behaviours of concern. We can think about sexual behaviour as being made up of behaviours that range from normal and healthy and age appropriate through to problematic and harmful. Sexual behaviour is generally a normal, healthy part of development in children and young people. It includes any behaviour, discussion or interest related to relationships, sexuality and sex. For the purposes of this training today, we're going to be focusing more at the other end, so the curious, exploratory, normal and healthy. Cool, thank you. Okay, so behaviour may not be sexual at all. So it's necessary to consider that sexualised behaviours of concern may not be sexually motivated, and they may be better for accounted as boredom or the relief of boredom, a stereotyped or repetitive behaviour, a lack of opportunity for privacy, which might inadvertently result in behaviours being displayed in public areas. Behaviours may be an expression of a desire for intimacy in someone who can't adequately express it. And obviously ill-fitting clothing and physical health problems, such as obviously tight foreskin or urinary tract infections, may result in touching and interfering with clothing, which can easily be misinterpreted as a sexualised behaviour of concern. And a functional behaviour for the person in achieving something irrespective of whether an observer could identify it or not. Amazing. So examples of sexualised behaviours can be making obscene gestures, touching private body parts of another person, non-consensual hugging, exposing one's body parts, disrobing and masturbating publicly, touching own body parts in public, discussing inappropriate sexual subjects, looking up skirts or down shirts, and non-consensual touching of non-genital parts of the body. Awesome. So before we go any further, now that we've described what it could be and what it isn't, I wanted to do the comparison between sexual deviancy and sexualised behaviours of concern. So before I even define what that is, as behaviour support practitioners, quite often we will be presented with a referral that will tell us we have a client with sexual deviant behaviour, and obviously even before we get out to assess them, we've already got those labels going on. And I think we could all put our hands up and say that has happened, because it happens so frequently. So we'll go through what is sexual deviancy, and I'll give you an example of when that doesn't end well. So any sexual behaviour, so sexual deviancy is any sexual behaviour such as paraphilia that is regarded as significantly different from the standards established by a culture or a subculture. So deviant forms of sexual behavior may include voyeurism, fetishism, bestiality, necrophilia, sadism, and exhibitionism. Deviant sexual interests are defined as enduring sexual attraction to sexual acts that are illegal, for example, rape, sex with children, or highly unusual. I really need some water. Anyway, so I wanted to give an example. That's all right, can leave that up there, Ellie, but I wanted to give an example of a bad example of when we got the referral, right, for the sexual deviancy. I actually unfortunately met with a client who had consensual sex. He was 18. His girlfriend at the time was 18. His parents, both parents, were really extreme, wouldn't necessarily say religious, but had very extreme views on who should be having sex and when it came to their children. And that he got labelled as a sexual deviant, and if you like, was basically treated like a registered sex offender. As it turned out, he had been chemically castrated in a disability institution for 35 years for having consensual sex with his girlfriend, and they were both over the age of 18. So when I say to you, we need to ensure that when we get this information, we are going to get bombarded with a lot of information, guys, all the time, yeah? But the most important thing is that we take all, like we hear it from all multiple areas, but we, as the behaviour support practitioner, get out and we assess what's actually going on the ground. Because that's a prime example, and it's not alone, where they can automatically fall into a subcategory, which he wasn't. And he's been back in sex therapy for 5 years and honestly will never be able to have an erection ever again. So I just wanted to flag, quite often we'll be met with judgment. Like, the most important thing is us. We don't judge. Our job is to assess behaviour as it's presented to us, obviously do our observations. Of course, we speak to all the stakeholders, but I just really wanted to flag how easily that can happen, and that man's life has changed for the worse purely from having consensual sex with his partner. Cool. Right. Where are we up to? Sorry, Ellie. Okay, so this here is a traffic light. I can see that much. I was going to say at the end, guys, there's a handout for this. This is basically for what we consider normal or, exploratory play through to things are a little bit concerning. Don't have to use it. It's just a bit of a guide, and it's from 0 through to 18. Obviously, when we're working with majority of our clients, they don't all have, but a lot have an intellectual disability. So obviously, we would be referring to the IQ assessment, where they sit in range to that. It's just a bit of a guide as to what's normal, as opposed to a little bit alarming as we're going through our assessment in due course. Cool. Dignity of risk. All right, so, and do you notice I wrote heck? Sarah's trying really hard not to swear today. Can we please all normalize the heck out of every single person in the entirety of this world has the right to experience safe sex within their own body? People that have known me would have heard me say this many a time. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. I'm not really quite sure what happens in the disability space. There's lots of judgment and things that come along, but we are all allowed to masturbate. Of course, it's our job to, obviously, we don't necessarily want our people doing it out in public all day, every day, but it's normal and it's natural, and I just need everybody to get on board that it's okay. It's completely normal and natural, and yes. So I really want to normalise that for every single person. And obviously, we're guided by things, obviously, under the NDIS. We work under the Convention of the Rights of People with a Disability. Excuse me. So the Convention of the Rights of, it's the International Human Rights Treaty between the UN, intended to protect the rights and dignities of people. So it's just a bit of a reminder that we are here to work for our people. And I also wanted to flag, I'm not sure if people have been around for a long time, but at the beginning of the introduction of the NDIS, it wasn't included, but it certainly was after the fact, that now sex therapists are an actual approved allied health professional under the NDIS. And we had one brave girl with a disability who stood up. And as a consequence of that, it is now approved to be able to refer our people on to sex therapists under the NDIS scheme. Cool. Thank you, Ellie. All right. When we're talking about building skill development, this is just a bit of an example. If anyone's got like something else, please jump off. I know Ellie said not to, but like you can, someone can talk, because I don't always like talking either. So for example, we have client, old mate, who's been referred to us because he's been masturbating in public and common areas, right? So obviously we're going to meet with him. We're going to establish he identifies that he's wanting to explore his body and to find out what he enjoys. So obviously, first step in regards to building the skill development, we're going to obviously work with him to find out what that's going to look like. And the first thing would obviously be education. So he's identified what he's wanting to do, and then we would go through things. So him wanting to explore his body is completely fine, but we would obviously work with him and break down the skill set that are required, and it's completely fine to do that. But we would obviously educate him that we will be doing that in a private space where he can go and pleasure himself in the privacy of his own room or wherever that needs to be. So that's just an idea, very general one, of like what it can look like on the ground when we're doing it. Okay. Sorry, it's frozen. I've got a black screen, Ellie. 1 second. Right, I'm assuming we're up to consent. I'm hoping that's on the page.
Yeah, that's
yes,
on, Sarah.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, guys. All right. So I guess the most important thing and the most sexiest thing in the world is consent. And obviously working with our clients to ensure that they actually understand that, obviously in an accessible format that works for them. So then we'd obviously, if like obviously work out where that is, where the gap is in that, and then we would then like obviously develop our intervention and our skill development around ensuring that consent is understood. And then obviously psychoeducation would be about understanding, does the client understand what's the difference between healthy and unhealthy, including elements of consent, obviously, and healthy sexual relationships, and what that could look like for them is a really good way to start. And I'll give you some stuff as we go through as to how we could start with those things. And obviously we would, like, when we're starting to build skill development, we're going to work with the client and set some smart behaviour support goals. And obviously we're going to include around the sexual elements to start working on together. Cool. Scope of role. So obviously we need to know our limitations, and we're going to stay within our role as a behaviour support practitioner. We're going to ensure that we check our own biases and ensure that we're not being judgmental towards the client as we're presented with this information. We're going to ensure that we check ourselves with any preconceived ones, because the bias is a very important part. As I was saying previously, like earlier on, we get met with a lot of information from a lot of different people. And I guess the whole thing is that we need to be able to be an effective behaviour support practitioner. Sometimes with confronting situations, including sexualised behaviours, we need to ensure where we are at before we walk in the door. Because like that's the most important thing, obviously, to be holistic and to ensure that we're not carrying any bias in before we walk in the doors to support the client. Now, if upon your assessment you assess, after you've assessed the behaviour, like the sexualised behaviour is problematic and potentially harmful, obviously a different threshold, we would obviously going to speak with your supervisor and your direct line manager to get support, clinical support. And obviously we would also look to refer on to any specialist area, for example, like a sex therapist or a sexologist, not in relation to that, we'll come back, and to complete assessments, including the ASK assessment. So the ASK assessment is the assessment of sexual knowledge. It is in part of our compendium. We are able to do it, but I just wanted to flag that it is a separate qualification that we need to hold to be able to deliver the ASK assessment. So if we don't have that, it's cool. We would just refer on to get someone else to complete it for us. And Ellie, did you want to talk about peak bodies and mandatory reporting and all that fun stuff now?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do
Cool.
that. So I know that a couple of practitioners had put questions in our Microsoft forms just asking about how we approach our obligations around mandatory reporting, but also considering, you know, where we become aware of or we have a suspicion that a crime has occurred. Of course, it is really difficult for us to provide case-specific advice in this context. So the advice is general in nature. You need to consider how that applies to your specific scenario. And my number one recommendation is you need to meet your mandatory reporting obligations first and foremost. That obviously relates to suspected crimes against children and young people. You also need to follow AAA's clinical incident assessment and management procedures. That is the easiest way for you to get the right advice that is specific to your particular case. And we will ensure that you're meeting all of your reporting obligations with regard to not only mandatory reporting, but if there are reporting obligations relating to potential crimes that have been committed. And in the event that there are no reporting obligations around those instances, we'll be able to support you with next steps that will keep you, the participant that you support, and any other individuals that are involved in that scenario safe and supported as you move through how that situation needs to be resolved. So I know that's really generic advice, but it's the best advice that I can give you that's not going to result in us perhaps like applying advice that is relevant to one situation to something that it's not quite relevant to, and you missing a step and finding yourself in a bit of trouble. So mandatory reporting, internal incident management procedures, that's the way to go.
Amazing. Thank you, Ellie. Awesome. Cool. So I don't probably, well, when to refer on, so I guess if we're unable to obtain the base sexual knowledge of the client, that would obviously be somewhere where we would refer on to get specialists in to come and provide that information to us. And obviously we would work in unison with them, like, you know, when it came to developing intervention and strategies. And then as Ellie just spoke about, obviously if there's any concerns, as she said, we would refer on. And I guess the most important thing is, remember, we are not the sex specialists. We are behaviour support practitioners. So we are not expected to have all the answers to any possible plethora of things that could be presented to us in a sexualized context or any other context. So we are not. And so we absolutely can refer to sex specialists to be able to assist us, particularly when we're dealing with sexualized behaviours of concern. Cool. And I don't think we need to do that because you just did that early, so we're good. So just remember, everybody, obviously our clients are incredibly vulnerable and are at risk of potential exploitation across all avenues. So obviously it's just something to continuously to be mindful of. And if we have any concerns at all, we would refer that on to our supervisors or managers, and therefore. Cool. All right, so positive behaviour strategies. Time to get into some good stuff. All right, so first things first, education is amazing. So education with the client. So obviously, depending on what the sexualized behaviour of concern is, to do justice to sexualized behaviours of concern, mate, like we probably have to do like, I don't know, like a 2-day workshop, right? Like we can't get into every single potential thing. But obviously really important key things is about safe touch and personal safety, healthy and respectful relationships and what that looks like, consent, develop boundaries that are obviously clear and consistent, don't ever make the client feel ashamed about their behaviour. Commentary, obviously, like that's disgusting or you're dirty, are not helpful. And obviously have open, clear and conversations with our client about sex, their thoughts and feelings, and work with them to educate them about private touch on their body parts in private spaces is completely natural and acceptable. Good place to start. So whilst we may not all be accredited to be able to deliver ask assessments, relationship circles is a good base point for assessment. So I'm sure you guys have probably already used these. You can obviously change up the language because the people that I play with would have a few words to say and it wouldn't be okay, Sarah, with some of these with some of this word. But obviously the idea is, you know, we get them to identify who's in their private circle, the hug circle, far away, the handshaking, the wave, and then the stranger. I've found with some clients it's actually really quite interesting because, you know, like they might actually like put like their support workers in the hug circle, yet their family were in the stranger circles. So, you know, I always find it's kind of a good way to like get like to assess the baseline of what that looks like. And then obviously we can work with them to do some education to understand how they come up with their circles. So that's another handout that you'll be getting as well at the end. Cool. Right. So that's just one suggestion. Now, the next thing we're going to do is how do we assess a sexualized behavior of concern? And again, you get a handout so you don't have to remember all this stuff on the top of your heads. That's not fun on a Friday afternoon. So basically, this is the screenshot and I'm very blind and I can't read that, but lucky I printed one up. It just goes through domains. So obviously family, the structure of the family, family and origin factors, the care history, most certainly can impact the individual skills. So their adaptive functioning versus their chronological age. Where do they sit? Developmental history, general intellectual functioning, degree of self-regulation, social functioning, interest and repetition. And then health, so physical maturation and sexual development, personal health and history, psychosexual development. And then we get into sexual knowledge, so base knowledge of socio-sexual, it's an interesting one, and the rules, educational history, and then sexual behaviour, so experiences and opportunities for normal experimentation with age-appropriate peers, the history and meaning of problematic sexual behaviour, if there is any, and then obviously their response to discovery and intervention. And then response to sexual behaviour, the parents or carers' response to disclosures of sexual behaviour is actually really quite interesting. I've found sometimes that's like very diverse. Some people, like everybody has different views, but quite often it's the parents or the caregivers or primary people that are caring for our people that have very interesting views on sexualized behaviour. Even down to trying to put that in a behaviour support plan is sometimes quite tricky to navigate. And then obviously involvement of clinicians in the legal system would be if it's problematic. So have they previously received any specialist clinical services? Have they been, like, obviously any interactions with the Justice Department, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a bit of an idea, again, a guide. You're welcome to use it or not, but it's something that like I use when we're actually assessing the sexualized behavior of concern, because I just think it's a good informed and obviously holistic way of looking at all the potential factors that may put them into this predisposition or these behaviors. Yeah. Case studies, they're always fun. I've got a good news story where this has worked out quite well. So one of my previous participants, we sat down and we met together. He'd spent most of his life in institutions, unfortunately, was dropped off at an orphanage at the ripe old age of 1 week old, hearing impaired and vision impaired. So had spent most time living in group facilities, no privacy. And when I got to start working with him, he told me his ultimate goal was to get a girlfriend. Amazing. So we like worked together, set some behavior support goals. But before we got to the girlfriend part, we knew he wanted to be able to understand what he liked within his own body. So we sat down together and he identified that like he'd never actually really masturbated and he was 50 years of age. Because of never actually having proper opportunity to do so, which is not great, but he was able to identify it. So we sat down and he reads Braille, and you have to scream at him, as in he's hearing impaired, but like he doesn't use any apparatus for that, so you have to yell. So we sat down together, so on his iPad and stuff, and we did sex toy shopping because he wanted to be able to experience safe sex within his body and he wanted the opportunity to be able to do that. I worked with a sex therapist. She identified that was fine. So then like got the budget and off we went. So we did that. And then of course it came time. So we researched what he was interested in, which was great. And then it came time to actually going and purchasing said sex toys. It was in a small country town. And it was at a place where it was also a tobacconist, the local tobacconist. So obviously went down to the organisation and asked for the shop to be closed while we did these purchases, just because I didn't want anyone to be hearing because he yells. So you can imagine it was a little bit fun. So we went down and we did our sex toy shopping together for the purchases he identified that he wanted. It was the longest half an hour of my life. But it was fun in regards to it. Yeah, so he was screaming at me at the top of his lungs. Sarah, is this the cock ring that has the rainbows that blow, with the bear with the rainbows that light up? And of course I'm like, yes. So I was just going to say it's a good example of like the holistic view and also the way that like he had a goal and we broke down his behavior support goals. And so his first goal was he wanted to experience safe sex within himself because he identified that he wouldn't know what that would look like to be with somebody else because he didn't even know what he liked within his own body. So just a good example of how it can work, and it worked exceptionally well. And the good news part is he now has a girlfriend. Yay. So yeah, I just wanted to, like, that's one of my case studies. So I just wanted to sort of say how it can work really well together. He identified a need, which was great. He didn't have a sexualized behavior of concern, but it's obviously sexually related. It wasn't a concern because he was at the other end where he was too scared to experiment because he'd always been in group homes and stuff. He got into his own SIL, he was sole occupancy, and then finally he's like, all right. Which was really exciting to be a part of. And I was just going to say, so like you can certainly have a bit of fun with it, but just obviously make sure that we refer on to sex therapists and stuff to obviously have their input because they are the therapists in this, so they are the specialists. But yeah, that's one of my case study examples that I thought worked out quite well. Does anyone else have one they'd like to share? We've got time for one or two, maybe. Does anybody want to talk? No? We just want to listen. Okay. Come on, Cass, you've got a story. I'm looking right at you.
I have a pretty good one.
Okay.
I had a forensic participant that I've worked with that was on the offenders list and was not able to achieve their wants and needs of wanting to sleep with a woman. So that was a very difficult time where the participant had a lot of obligations to attend to court, where things were at a high risk from a psychologist, and we we work towards figuring out what that participants' financial constraints are, if they are able to engage in a safe sex work environment, which they really seeked at the time. They didn't want to have a partner or a relationship. They just wanted to have that individual just want a need met. And so we then identified a NDIS registered sex worker that would help us supporting that transition, which she was very excited to engage in. We met with the NDIS planner as well to explain that we don't have a replacement behavior for what has previously happened, and this is a very high risk scenario. And if we want to set up our participant for success, we really need to come up with some very strong ideas here. So at the end, we were able to get funding per month allocated, so he was able to at least do this once a month and see somebody. And it was a very effective replacement behavior where actually the participant came back. We measured this with a quality of life assessment where he said, look at how my life used to be and look what I'm having now. This participant is now able to engage in employment, maintain his ongoing visits. So it all is a bit of a rainbow story, to be honest, but it took 2 years to get there. It was very difficult. We're now able to not having to rely on those additional funds. And the very unfortunate event, though, that I have to share, though, is that this participant unfortunately has passed away due to a medical condition. But other than that, he had like a year of his life where he had a very good quality of life, and where we really did make a difference.
That's very exciting. Not about the death. That's not nice, but unfortunate. But I mean, that's
So
wonderful
sad
to hear. Yeah. Very, very sad, but very positive outcome that you're able to achieve. And like obviously a lot of work to get there, but that was amazing. Thank you for sharing. Cool. Anybody else got one for me? Somebody's coming to the camera.
Hey, I got one. So not necessarily a behavior of concern, but I guess a concerning situation. Had a young lady with some significant impulse control issues, tended to do whatever popped into their mind at the time. And when I first started working with them, they had just started work as a sex worker in a brothel, which for this client, there was a lot of concerns around because of their, I guess they were reasonably independent, but they were very vulnerable. Generally, and there was a bit of a concern about, I guess there was a lot of discussions between me, the support coordinator, and her guardian around, I guess, what we should do with this at the time. And I think at the end of the day, we decided to leave it, partly for relationship, partly for dignity of risk. They stopped on their own after a couple of months after they contracted an STD. And so it kind of resolved itself, but it was also a very tricky situation to have to navigate, because it was kind of like, they can do this if they want, but also like, it was just, there was a lot of naivety Like, I remember talking to them around, like, you know, is this a safe place for you to be working? And they were like, oh, they always have to wear condoms. And I'm like, okay, what if someone pays extra to not do that? What would happen then? And they were like, it'll be fine. And then 2 weeks later, they had the STD. Like, oh, that wouldn't happen. And then it did happen. So
Ouch.
it's, yeah, it was a tricky situation to navigate there.
And it is. That sounds very tricky because, I mean, obviously, apart from like education, that would be appropriate for your client. Like, I mean, it's not our job to stop that, right? But it is tricky to find like how do we navigate that safely for everybody involved. Did it freeze? Have I frozen?
No, sorry. I
Right.
wasn't aware if you wanted a response to that one.
I finally just got the screen back, and then I'm like, I was just talking to someone. I'm pretty sure that, and then I'm like, no, I've got nothing. I'm like, okay, right. Sorry, my screen is no longer black. I can see people again. That's exciting.
Yes. This may
Thank
be
you very
double
much for
dipping,
sharing.
so go ahead.
Cool.
Awesome.
Right, speaker.
I'm on speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, my question was, are you right to continue?
Oh, I was like, what? Yes, Ellie, I am right to continue. Sorry. All right. So, working from the evidence-based framework that we get to work in positive behavior support, as we do, we would obviously choose the one behavior in most need of change that impinges on other behaviors that put the client at the most risk to themselves. Involve the client as much as possible in trying to change the behavior by giving them choices, scheduling preferred activities, giving them time alone with privacy, and providing them with options for a full and engaging life. We would work towards finding alternatives and reinforcers that will help the person change the behavior through safe and fulfilling sexual exploration and provide positive reinforcement. My favoriteest thing, unconditional positive regard, for appropriate behaviors. Cool. So how do we do that? We ensure that we maintain a consistent approach to support intervention across all settings. This will ensure that regular consistency across the board. We communicate effectively, both verbally and non-verbally, when working with our people, particularly with ASD and ID, as they may have difficulties with communication and understanding what they hear and being able to express what they know or want. So what do I mean by that? So obviously verbally, we are talking now, this is verbally. And when I'm talking about non-verbally, I would be utilizing, be that a social story, a character, or something like something visual for the client to be able to back up what we've been discussing. So I think at the end, I've given you some, they're from New South Wales Planning. Don't come after me. They are not my social stories, but they're social stories for males and females about masturbation, which, look, they're not great, but they're certainly a base point for something. But I have found that that is by far the most successful thing, not just talking, by also following up with that will also assist in embedding that information for our clients. Cool. Ellie, I'm going too quick. It's like only like 3:06.
Don't worry, I put like 400 questions in the chat, like of my own questions as we go. So you'll have heaps
Oh,
of
good.
stuff
400.
to fill the time with.
Right. All right. So basically, how do we do this? So we're going to take our time to accurately assess the function of the behavior because it's not always for pleasure. We're going to ensure that we're working under our framework, our evidence-based framework. We're going to consult with the therapist, like the sex therapist as required. And then we're obviously going to work towards commencing education on the sexualized behavior with the client in the right format for them. Cool. Do you want us to start hitting me with questions? Because I've just got resources. Oh, yeah, there are resources that I'm going to give you at the end.
Cool.
Yes.
So
Question time.
questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that people can see you, Sarah. Please
Okay.
feel free to put your questions in the chat, or otherwise you can use the raise hand function. I'm going to scroll all the way back up to the first question that I had asked because this is my PD as well.
Right.
What do we need to consider before recommending that a participant is provided with funding to access a sex worker? And is this within the scope of a behaviour support practitioner?
Good question. In regards to advocating and requesting a sex worker, I personally would want to explore a lot of other things first. It would not be the first thing I'd ever go to, because potentially there's lots of things that people could be trialing and erroring within their own body to see if that works first before we go straight to recommending a sex worker. Are you still there? Is my computer frozen?
You're delaying a little bit.
Yeah, I know. A bit special. Right. Does that answer your question, Ellie, or do you want more?
I always want more
Okay.
and more.
Well, what do you want to know?
I guess
I can tell you hand on heart, after 4 years in PBS, I've recommended a sex worker for one person.
and
that was after 18 months. And working with a sex therapist for that the whole time as well, and trialing lots of other things first, including sex toys, and obviously it was a lot of work to do for those 18 months, but it was only after consent was obtained, consent was understood, what that looked like, modeling obviously not modeling sex, that's not my job, but modeling positive relationships, what does that look like, and all that. Like, there was a lot of education that had to be done before we were comfortable to even assess the risk of advocating for a sex worker. Bearing in mind I work with forensic clients, so it would never be my first point of call, ever.
Yeah, okay. So there are a bunch of different things that we go through beforehand, which I guess is similar to how we would work with other behaviours of concern. We don't go 0 to 100 straight away. We kind of grade up through the recommendations over time.
Yes.
I'm trying to now think of I had a question in my head that I felt like the question was super profound, and now I have lost it.
It'll come back.
It'll come back. Might just go on to one of the next questions and I'll come back. So,
sure.
How do you approach when clients put people in a relationship circle that may not be appropriate? I have had experience with this where the participants are always like, yes, you're in my closest circle. I'm like, no, I'm not. How do you navigate that as a practitioner?
Boundaries. First and foremost would be boundaries. So that's why I like to do it, because it's a good gauge, particularly, and like if I happen to be like in like the innermost circle, then that's what I would be doing, boundaries. That's amazing that you feel that way, mate. However, I'm your behaviour support practitioner, so therefore I would be sitting up here and then we would just keep repeating that behaviour so that he got to the point that he understood. So sometimes you got to do relationship circles like 100 times, guys. Like, it's a work in progress.
Do you ever find that when you're seeking to establish those boundaries with your participants that it ruptures the therapeutic relationship that you have? Because I would imagine that, if a participant feels like they're super close to you and then you're turning around and being like, sorry, we're not best friends, I'm actually like this far away from you. Does that ever, I guess, create resentment or hostility in the relationship? And how do you minimize that from occurring?
Ellie, you're asking me that's not a thing. No, it's never ruptured any relationship. I guess my favorite strategies I always go to is obviously unconditional positive regard. So that was what I'd be doing, and then I would also be educating them. That's great that you feel that way, and then I'd just be explaining the therapeutic role, and I would do that over time. I wouldn't be brutal about it, but I would ensure that they understood what that meant, and that's okay if that's how they feel. And I would never not. Obviously, I wouldn't diminish that, but I would just be really clear in my boundaries in regards to where I sit and why I sit where I sit, and then just reinforce that.
Yeah, cool. And I think for me, something that the people that are on this call might not kind of be picking up on just because they don't know you as well as I do. But
sorry.
Sarah is literally the master of unconditional positive regard, and being able to normalize, any presentation, any situation, and to really, we call it in psychology, roll with resistance. So no matter what's in front of you, just staying that cool, calm, and collected on the surface. And I think that really does go a long way to maintaining therapeutic rapport where you're needing to establish boundaries. You're not saying, I'm putting in this boundary to protect myself from you. It becomes more about a conversation of, we're putting this boundary in place because that is the nature of our relationship together. It's about making sure that you're aware of what you can expect from me, but also setting up what I can expect from you as well. It's not, 2 middle fingers, get me out of that intimate circle. It's about protection. It's about compassion. It's about the support that we provide to people.
Definitely. I was going to say, and like as Ellie was saying, with unconditional positive regard, like I have some that, like I have one guy in particular, he'll always say at the end of the phone call, "I love you," and I'll always say, those words are never going to come out of my mouth. I really enjoy working with you, but it becomes like rote, as in force of habit. And then he laughs and he goes, "Oh God, Sarah, I'm sorry." I'm like, "No, like it's fine." And I just went, "I enjoy working with you, but you're never going to hear me say I love you." And he's like, "No, of course you wouldn't say that because you're my behavior bitch." I'm like, "Damn straight. Like that's not how we talk to each other." So I was like, it's with kindness, never judgment. It's just, but it's also about like setting those boundaries clearly.
And staying really firm with them as well. I know that there's a lot of conversations about scope and transparency in the behaviour support space at the moment. We're brought into people's homes, and sometimes it makes it really difficult to understand where those boundaries are with our participants, and what is our scope, and when do we cross between professional and personal. Being really consistent and really clear with those boundaries is so essential, particularly when you're working in this space, because it is such an intimate conversation to be having with a participant. If those boundaries aren't clear, it's a very, very slippery slope into some dangerous professional territory. You need to make sure that you're really clear, confident, and consistent in those boundaries in order to set the therapeutic relationship up for success and to protect everyone who's involved in the service.
Definitely.
All right. More questions from
Somebody
me, Sarah?
had their hand up before. Was that a thing?
Oh, yeah. Did someone have their hand up?
I did. I had my hand up, but Ellie kind of touched on what I was going to mention. I was kind of saying, like, if I had a participant that put me in a circle that was not in line with our relationship, my first point of call would be asking them why.
Yep.
Why did you put me here? Let's work through that, and then let's build upon what they know. Because my only probably takeaway from that is how that could be then transferred to when they put somebody else in another circle, like their support workers in, like they're really intimate, and where there's like that conflict between that boundary, and how that then might be able to be transferred to those kind of relationships, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Sorry, my computer has gone black again. Yes, Bridget, that made sense.
Thank you.
I don't know if you can see me shaking my head, but yes, it made sense.
All right. More questions from me, sorry. How do you navigate sexual exploration and education when a participant is in a conservative context? So obviously, we work with a lot of families who might not believe in sex before marriage, who may be, especially dismissive of masturbation and self-exploration. How do we, as a behaviour support practitioner, have that unconditional positive regard for differences in culture, while also being like, hey, the behavior would kind of fix itself if you would let your child self-explore in their bedroom?
Yes. It's always, it's fun, right? The dance. I call it the dance.
Yes.
So yes, it's very, very difficult because we get lots of conflicting thoughts and opinions about those things, but I always just stay in the lane of we're here for positive behavior. And the only way to actually make it a positive experience is exactly that. We're not here for negative reinforcement. So usually if I'm presented with that, Ellie, it would be a lot of psychoeducation with the parents first about what not to do. Like we don't shame them about it. We don't tell them that they're dirty and disgusting. Like we don't actually do that stuff because we're actually reinforcing the same behavior. And whilst we're down with the behavior, maybe not in the lounge room. Maybe we'll work with him or her to get it into the bedroom so they can do that safely in the privacy of their own bedroom, as opposed to maybe in open spaces. But it is very tricky. It's really, really tough to do the education with the parents that are very, very conservative and off it completely, not having a bar.
Yeah, and I guess that applies to so many of the behaviours that we work with as well, fairly what I would consider to be like normative use of profanity in teenagers, for example. A lot of families feel some type of way about teenagers swearing in their home, and it's really difficult to bring them along the journey of positive behaviour support where that's the focus.
Yes.
And, with sexualized behaviour, it's often about stopping. We stop we're being asked to stop the behavior from happening. And it's like, no, it's positive behavior. We're looking for alternatives, right? We're not stopping. So yeah, I guess it is really hard to find that compassionate approach, and to continue seeking that common ground where there are those challenges, but persistence, I guess, is the key. And rapport building
Just
too.
eventually, I believe eventually there'll be some sort of compromise around that. I haven't found a family yet that I haven't been able to, with consistency around that stuff and the education, to try to at least trial something. And then, because I would also give them the education about the benefits, but also the negative components if they're not able to actually actively express this stuff and be able to identify this and have pleasure within their own bodies. Like, they're the things that I would probably go with, not initially, obviously. When I go in too harsh to start with, but yeah, like, I've found that also does help, because it's usually just fear, right? Like, scared that, like, they're going to go one way. Like, a lot of parents, like, particularly like for our aging clients, are terrified that they're going to, like, procreate, the world is going to end. Like, I mean, there's a lot of different rationale and reasons, but like, it's usually fear. It's usually coming from a good place sometimes, and like, and they want to wrap them up in cotton wool, and you can see that side too. 100% completely fair.
Neil has asked, sorry, if you can just use
right.
the raise your hand function, just so we can keep a lid on it. There's a lot of people knocking around. Neil, go ahead. I was about to ask you a question.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask, in terms of, I have a 14-year-old, recently 14-year-old, who likes to touch people all everywhere, like breasts, like, we're even talking family members' breasts, genitals, all sorts. He uses sexualized language all the time. And yeah, so this has probably been going on for at least a year since I've been involved.
Okay.
And it's been going on long before that. So it's occurring at school and things like that. So he's getting sort of pulled out of school and all sorts of things, all because of this behavior. What are your thoughts in terms of that? Because obviously we're trying to stop this particular part of the behavior. I should proviso, I'm not a PBS, I'm an OT.
Okay.
So,
good.
but the PBS is involved from another service. But yeah, just thought I'd get your sort of thoughts on that.
Okay, so I was going to say
where you would point the needle on that one.
Excellent question. We love these questions. What have you been working on with the client in the past year? So, like, if he's now being, like, not able to go to school and stuff, like, what things as a team have you been working on?
He goes to school for a period of time. Like, he goes to school for sort of part of the day, but there's quite often he will just get sent home because things have gone out of whack. Look, we've done some exploration in terms of what's going on. My feeling is there's a sensory component to it, because he also likes earlobes and things like that. So we've tried to instigate some sensory alternatives with that. But he's a little bit sort of, his thoughts can be a bit erratic, and so you can put stuff in and then it'll be lost in the next week. So his ability to actually sort of take that on and utilize that is pretty limited. Have been using some social circles stuff and sort of setting boundaries. He very much comes back and goes, I don't understand why. Like, why is it a problem not to go out nude, sort of thing? So, but he's a very intelligent kid in lots of other ways. Like, he knows about stars and reads lots of things, and so yeah, we've tried a few things like that. He now has to have 2 support workers at any given time because of his behavior. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on.
Okay. Do you know what sort of strategies the PBS was doing, like the behaviour support practitioner, to try?
They essentially stopped working with him. They were working with the parents to actually educate them on how to handle it, and also working separately with support workers on how to manage that as well. Frequent meetings with the school and those sorts of things to try and put in some boundaries. Lots of boundaries work as well, just in terms of where we are. So, like, even just with me, he would want to touch my chest and all sorts of things as well. Yeah.
Okay.
We've gotten to the point I can sit beside him and he won't try and do anything with, like, he'll try and stick his legs on me and things like that as well now. just to have some kind of physical contact.
Touch. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Good question. I was going to say it's a little bit tricky to answer. So if the behaviour support practitioner has been working with everybody around the client, I don't know what sort of intervention they're doing on the ground. I'm not entirely sure how to answer your question.
Sorry, I can jump in here. Sorry, I'm the speechy on the case too. I work with Neil.
Hello.
Hi. So the behaviour support practitioner is based at school, which is why I don't think that they do. It's an
Gotcha.
aspect. So
Sure.
that's why they don't provide one-on-one intervention. Yeah.
That makes complete sense, right? Because that's what I was like, that's interesting that they're doing it around, but why are we not doing direct intervention with the client? But that would make sense. Right. So we don't have a behaviour support practitioner. Sounds like you might need one. An
external one.
Yeah. I think that would be a good point to start. So I was going to say, in regards to that, like as you said, I'll obviously be exploring the sensory thing, which all you guys would be doing anyway. In regards to, like, you've already done the relationship circles and stuff, I guess like the next steps would be to try to understand, like, he doesn't think there's anything wrong with like disrobing and stuff in public. That's fine. I get that bit. But like, in regards to the sexual element, like what's his knowledge? What's his base knowledge? What does he actually understand that? Does he understand consent? Because even touching people, like non-consensual touching, like that would be, I wouldn't even start necessarily on the sexual elements. Maybe consent would be.
Yeah, I think he understands stuff like that on a factual level.
Yep.
I don't think he kind of gets it at that deeper kind of level. Like, I think a lot of the stuff, like even when, like I said, he can tell us about stars and things like that, but I sat him down to play some cards at one point and he didn't know what the suits meant.
Okay.
I was like, wow, interesting. And like couldn't get card games. He needed all the details, all the rules, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Have we done social stories on like safe touch and stuff? Has that all been explored? I'm not talking to you like you guys don't know. You are specialists.
No, I haven't. I haven't personally. I'm not sure what's been done sort of at that aspect kind of level.
And I only came on this week to see him.
So okay,
for assessment.
Fair.
So.
Right. So we don't know. Because I was going to say that could certainly be like I mean, obviously across the disciplines, but like that would certainly be like a base to get a bit of a baseline, as you said, like really, really intelligent and right into his stars and stuff, but maybe just see where his baseline is in regards to understanding.
Yeah.
Even down to consent.
Yeah.
Would probably be where I would start.
Yeah, so I did touch on that in terms of, if people are, asking and things like that, and then he'll go and ask someone inappropriately to touch them. And you're like, no, all right, there's still times when you can ask. So
got it.
Yeah.
Tricky.
So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
It's like, no, you can't ask your classmates. Like,
no.
So yeah, interesting.
It does sound interesting, Neil.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Sarah, I'm just mindful that you actually have a job that you're meant to be doing. Do you need to go bang on 3:30?
No.
Sick.
Good.
We can keep hanging out here as long as you need to, guys. If you do have other things to toddle off to, by all means do that. Our next question, given consent is super sexy,
yes.
How do we go about obtaining consent from clients who are non-verbal? What does it look like in a non-verbal client, and how is that different to what we would expect from a verbal participant?
It's not really that different, Ellie. So I've found with non-verbal and verbal ones, you guys would have seen like the clip about tea, making tea? Consent, the tea one, the cup of tea? No?
I'll find it. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I will find it.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I've worked with 2 non-verbal people, and at the end actually then signed to me, did I want a cup of tea at the end of it? So I was going to say, in regards to consent, I'll usually start there. It's usually pretty, like for the gamut of people from 0 to 65 that I play with, like I haven't had anyone that doesn't quite understand about cups of tea, and then relating that back.
I think this is the right video. I'm just popping it in the chat for people who might be interested and scrolling back up to find my questions. Taryn has asked, what is the role of the sex therapist?
Their role? So depending obviously what the sexualized behavior of concern is, but the role of the sex therapist is to, we would refer to them to get some guidance. Potentially it could be to get the assessment of sexual knowledge completed. It could also be to get a response plan in regards to and get their expertise as to how do we best handle this behavior. And obviously they can then refer on or make recommendations to us. So that could be, they might come back and say, met with a client, think that the best course of action is to trial, I don't know, touch, sex toys, and or sex worker. The idea of the sex therapist is kind of like the specialist, like we are of behavior, they're the specialists of sex. So that's what they do.
The next question is around related to participants who want to explore themselves using sex toys.
Mhm.
Are there sites that we can support participants to access that are for NDIS, NDIS registered for purchases? And do you know if they can be purchased in low or mid cost AT stuff, through NDIS plans, obviously?
Yeah.
I'm trying to speak OT language and I'm not very good at it.
So good.
Sorry, OTs that are on the call.
I was going to say the OTs could probably tell you where the best places are to go. But I was going to say not necessarily one that's user friendly for all people with disabilities. I'd just Google it, mate. Depending on obviously the presentation of the client, and what might actually be required, obviously above the stock standard sex toys, as to what that might look like, because we most certainly have got them. In regards to the costings and the funding, I don't spend anything in anyone else's plan without consent, because it's very sexy. So I wouldn't be recommending, personally, I wouldn't be telling anyone to go and buy sex toys, obviously, without input from the specialist who would recommend that stuff. I would follow their plan.
Yeah, so I guess that answers the last question as well around should sex toys be assessed and recommended by a sex therapist? It sounds like absolutely we should be seeking that input.
Yes, and sometimes we also might get asked as well, guys. So after the sex therapist has put their report down, sometimes they might actually ask for an advocacy letter from the BSP in line with what they're recommending, because we're addressing the behaviour of concern. So sometimes I've been asked to do an advocacy letter in recommendation of the sex toys or the purchase of whatever it is. But usually I just follow their lead. But in regards to your question, in regards to the funding component, it can be funded, but that's not up to me to determine. I'm a behaviour support practitioner, not the planner. Yeah.
I'm trying to summarize Aria's question. So 8-year-old participant with ASD who is mostly non-speaking, inappropriately touching his dog's anus, and has also
excuse me.
Yeah, also touched the bottom of a girl at his school as well. Are there strategies or recommendations that you would make in relation to that case?
I have questions.
Sure.
What's the intensity, duration, frequency of said touching?
And this is
it
the
happening
thing.
all the time? There she is. I've got questions. I can't answer questions. I've got more questions to ask first.
I just want to, just before we dive too deeply into this case, I want to add the caveat. It's really hard to provide case-specific recommendations in this kind of forum. It's hard for Sarah and also myself to get the full scope of what's happening for a participant without kind of exposing participants' privacy. So we need to try and speak in as generalized terms as we can. Aria, I'm going to challenge you to do that. Let's see how we go.
Okay, I will try to keep this short for you guys. Seems like the frequency and duration, it was a one-off incident at school when the participant saw the girl's bottom a bit more exposed because her pants were drooping and shoved his hands up there. Whole incident report was called. A few other incidents at the same school that year were just obsessively staring at other kids if their pants were drooping. Lost privileges of doing group sessions to the bathroom. He had to then go to the bathroom individually. Otherwise, he'd just stare and try to go over to other kids in his classroom.
Gotcha.
And then regarding the dog at home, I think it's just been a few one-off times, maybe 5 times in the duration of a year.
Okay. Right. Cool. So it sounds more like he's a little bit more focused on people's underwear and bottoms than what he was with the dog as such.
It's just he likes to poke the anus. So I did find a little sensory toy that kind of is a slippery tube, if that makes sense.
Yep.
they were like fun in the 90s. I don't know if you guys remember them. So you could kind of like poke your finger in, and it's like the closest thing I could think of
Yeah.
to kind of
I know what you're talking
resemble
about.
that.
I'm
Okay,
old.
okay.
I understand what you're talking about.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think I'm just a bit just wanting to get maybe any advice or any suggestions you might have. We've tried some social stories and it seems like they just go over his head.
Okay.
At the moment, it seems like
And are the
it's
school
an
good to
ignored.
work with, Aria? Like, are they?
So
The
he's
school's been good?
transferred to a new school and they've had no issues since he's been there. And that's been about 3 months, 4 months.
Yay, honeymoon period. Sweet. Or, you know, maybe it's miraculously gone. Stranger things have happened. Okay, right. I was just going to say, because, like, I mean, if you can get access to, like, you know, good people, good quality staff at the school, it makes it so much more easier when we're trying to address these behaviors. In regards to strategies, well, you've already done one. And you've already trialed the social stories and things. When you say they go over his head, was it because he was disinterested or not in? Do you think like it was like a little bit like beyond him in regards to, was it too low or was it too high in regards to comprehension, or?
Could have been too high in comprehension, I would probably assume.
Yeah.
Also, he just doesn't really respond well to stories at all. His mom has told me.
Okay. So, so I was going to say, like, if that was the case, like lots of clients, I mean, that's not that uncommon, right? Like some people are like, what? I don't want no book. Sometimes I'll change it up and use like characters, like find out what they're into and stuff. Like I'd actually like kind of make it a little bit more exciting and inventive, like sort of like a cartoon book. I've found the boys seem to dig a bit better, than stock standard social story. So I was just going to say, maybe like I would probably review that to start with, and obviously keep working with the specialist to find out what is interested. But it sounds like, I mean, the things you've done so far sound pretty good. And there hasn't been that behavior at school for 3 months or nearly 4. So we're taking that as a win
Thank
to
you for
start with.
that.
No, that's all right. I was going to say, keep doing what you're doing. Sounds good.
Thanks.
Somebody's got their
Alright.
hand up, Ellie.
Sorry, I was just working through the questions in the chat.
Oh.
Kylie, do you want to come off mute and ask your question while you've got Sarah's attention?
Yeah, sure. I was just asking, do you have any links to resources like information sheets or something? Because obviously if like they want to talk about that, but they're not in that quite comfortable phase to say what they really want to talk about, like is it information sheets I can give them, like this is what personal touching is, this is what sexual, like just, you know how you get information packs about like STDs and stuff and it just breaks it down what they are. Is there any, do you have any resources for that regard, like for sexual activity and that sort of stuff?
I think the resources I'm giving you kind of touch on those things. Like they've got pictures as well, but like they kind of touch on like beyond just masturbation. Is that what you're meaning? Or
it's just stuff that we can give to the participants more so, just so if they want to read about it, because you know how like if they're a little bit uncomfortable, like they're talking to you about it, but it's still that uncomfortable phase, at least I can give them, here's some information about it, you read it and decide what you want to do, sort of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say it'll probably depend, Kylie, because it depends on like obviously like the interest. If you're meaning just more about like safer exploration of sex, there is heaps of stuff.
Oh, there is
heaps of stuff out there.
Yeah.
Particularly for people with intellectual disabilities and also with intellectual disabilities and ASD. So I was going to say there's heaps and heaps of stuff, like heaps of resources that we could certainly be doing, like to be handing out to the clients. I understand what you're saying, because like sometimes they're not going to want to get down and dirty and get into it with you, like especially if mum's sitting next to them, right? So I completely understand what you're asking me. I was just like, yeah, I don't think I've got any off the top of my head, but I just Google it, man.
Yeah, okay.
And there's always resources.
Yeah. Okay, awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Cassandra Tolley, hello.
Hi,
You've been
Sarah,
hiding. I didn't even know you were here.
I've been here. I've been in the background listening the whole time.
How you going?
I'm very well, thank you. Ellie, am I allowed to ask my question?
Sure.
Sorry to just jump in. So I am curious, what safety considerations are you looking for in a response plan? In particular, with sexualized behaviors in the community. I think my go-to is sort of to like get them out, basically. But like, is there anything in particular, anything else that comes to your mind when you're thinking about sexualized behaviors in a response plan?
Can you give me a bit of an idea of what we're talking about, my friend?
So say, for example...
Are we talking about harmful ones?
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. I'm
Yeah,
thinking
right.
more so the harmful ones that might have like an impact on other people in the community, or maybe on a support worker that is also in the community with the participant.
Yes, right. I figured that's where we'll go. I'm like, hang on, Cass, I better check with you because I could be going down different rabbit holes. Yes. So, of course, in response plan. So, yep, as you just said, would obviously be to do our best, particularly if we're with support workers, would be to try to remove them from community as quickly as we could. Like, obviously, if it is harmful sexualized behaviors, which we're not getting into today, Cass, you got to come back and see me again, different time. But yes, I was going to say usually it would be that to obviously reduce demands, just our stock standard stuff in regards to obviously try to reduce that, like the potential harmful sexualized behavior and keep people, the community safe as best as we can.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Alrighty. Does anyone have other questions that they wanted to put forward? Have I missed anything? It's your last chance, pals.
She's wrapping it up.
I was contemplating whether I should ask the question or not. I'm just wondering whether it's something I should explore further or not. I have a teenager, and it hasn't been frequent, the behavior. So essentially, he would touch himself in front of his brother and find humor out of that. But it hasn't happened often. I'm just wondering whether that's something I should look deeply into and try to, or like, maybe it's stupid to say, but is that something that's less concerning and just looking at it as teenage behavior and trying to find humor out of that?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're asking, Ben. I was going to say I would still explore it in due course. Correct, it could just be to get the reaction from the brother. He could find that funny. But I guess our job as behaviour support practitioners, we don't ever want that to be modelled out in the community, right? And we don't want them getting labelled as something else. So I'm not suggesting, yes, we must do something about it right now, guns blazing, but I most certainly would be something that I would be exploring with the client in due course, and then go back through the things about, appropriate behavior modeling stuff. I most certainly I wouldn't just ignore. I most certainly would address it. Yeah.
It definitely isn't the most concerning, but it
no.
definitely is. Yeah,
I figured
it
that was the
definitely
case.
is. Yeah. No, I just wanted to. Yeah, sorry, that may be a stupid question, but
no, the only stupid question, the only such thing is the ones that are not asked, mate. There is no such thing as a stupid question. But I completely agree, and I figured that it most certainly wasn't the most pressing concern that you had with your client, but it most certainly is something that absolutely valid and warrants investigation and conversations with him, and education pieces in due course, Benjamin.
How would you approach such a, because that's very new to me, because this is my first client. So
all right. Welcome to the club.
Yeah, thank you.
Fun. I was going to say address it. I would just probably casually bringing it up. And who's it been in front of? Just family members? Obviously the brother, but who?
From what I've gathered so far,
yep.
What has been told to me, it is only the brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, and is it the other brother that told you about these incidences?
No, it hasn't come from the brother's mouth. This is what has just been told to me by the support coordinator. Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I was going to say I would probably treat that like any other behavior, my friend, and I would be doing my investigation.
Yeah. Right, but you're saying that's just a conversation that I could potentially have with the participant.
In due course, yes. After we've investigated to see what that looks like, and but it most certainly would be something that we would explore. Yeah. We wouldn't ignore it. We would explore it because it would be potentially is quite relevant to all the other presenting behaviours of concern. Yeah. Okay. And also it's our opportunity to educate them educate him in regards to what's appropriate and what's not, even if it is in the privacy of his own home. You know what I mean? Yeah. Any opportunity to educate, man, I'm down. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
No worries.
All right. Now it's your real last chance. Any other questions or queries for Sarah before we let her go back to her actual job? which is not doing favors for me, unfortunately.
So good, Sally. I was going to say, well, if you do want in due course, I am going to be doing a more funner one, which is your harmful, problematic, sexualized behaviors of consent. So if you want to get me back, I can come play again. Yeah,
we're going to put a react to review in the behaviour support practitioners group chat. There is an option at the bottom for you to show your interest in Sarah returning for that round 2. So if you would like for Sarah to come and speak to us about the more harmful end of the spectrum, please show your interest by reacting and reviewing. We will coordinate that with her and get it onto the CPD calendar for you guys.
And I promise, Cassandra Tully, there will be lots more answers to your questions about response plans.
I love a good response plan, so I'm down for
that. I know you do.
Yep. Alrighty. I am going to stop the recording now. Let's say goodbye to Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. I really appreciate your time. And thank you guys for asking so many questions, keeping the conversation going. I know we've run very, very, very over time, but I think it shows the interest in the topics. Please react to review before you sign off for the day, and otherwise have a good weekend. Thanks, team.
Thanks, everybody.